Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hello and good morning, Omer. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show. Thank you so much for taking your time out for this.
Pleasure. I'm delighted to be interviewed for this.
Great stuff. Omer, when I went through your LinkedIn profile, I noticed that for the majority of the last 2 decades, you've had experience in tutoring students for the GMAT test. But I'd like to take a step back and ask you to share your journey as to how you got into teaching itself.
Sure, Jack. I think it was, in my case, an instinct that came unexpectedly to take an interesting direction. I had taken the GMAT, I think, like everybody else, for business reasons, let's say career reasons. It was the thing to do if you were going to business school in the United States, and that's the only reason I ever heard about the GMAT. Because everybody had heard about it who was in that corporate environment. At that age, I was 25, I think, at that time.
Right.
So I took it, and it was an exceptionally interesting experience. I'm very stimulated by challenges. I think that's happened to me more than once. And the GMAT, especially the math section, completely surprised me. And I got a very low score. I thought it was a very low score. I had majored in math in university. So I thought 65th percentile was really not something to think about.
Right.
I think that was the initial hook for me with this test, without knowing anything about or thinking about teaching it or working in that space at all. It was just the initial slap in the face that hooked me on this test. And then afterwards, I for other reasons, I think, nothing to do with this test, I left the corporate track. I decided not to go to business school,
Right.
at least at that time, and I still haven't gone. And I was looking for something else to do. And I thought, well, I'm not sure how I heard about it, but teaching the GMAT was something you could do part-time. So I interviewed for that at Kaplan. It's a sort of a behemoth educational company in the United States.
Right.
And they accepted me to teach GMAT and GRE and SAT, and I sort of trained on each of those tests and taught their classes at that level. It's sort of a middle market. You can think about, they're not looking to get people into Harvard, let's say, or any of the top schools, but they're looking to get a respectable GMAT score, starting from a much lower base. It's that kind of product. So that's how I started. And just I think at that point, there were two interesting things going on in this space for me. One was I was still, let's say, living with my low math score, because I got a high overall score, but it was not because of the math, right? It was because of the verbal reasoning skills, actually.
Right.
So my math score was still, I was feeling a little bit shady, like here I am teaching you math, but actually my math score was pretty crappy. So that was
Right.
one thing that kept me interested, because I was studying, how we could improve that, and that gave me a lot of energy. I would do about in those early years, I did 20-25 hours a week of studying, thinking, just sort of private research type stuff about the mathematics of the GMAT, most especially. So that was a nice way to earn a living, a part-time job. While I was thinking in my mind, what am I supposed to do with myself, generally speaking? What's the next step generally? Right. And it turned out that the second thing came on, which was the teaching itself was an interesting exploration for me at that time, and even now. So those two things kept me got me more involved with the GMAT, and that's, I think, the reason I was coming up on 20 years now in that field, just because of these two things.
Great. And the first time you took GMAT, were you in the US, or you were
Yeah.
outside of the US looking to get into the US to do an MBA?
No, I started in the US. I moved there when I was 10 years old, and
Right.
I took the GMAT while living in San Francisco, and I was working in investment management as a junior equity analyst in investment management. And then if you want to become a little bit less junior, you need to go to business school.
Right. Omar, from the topic that we're going to discuss, this is a slight, detour, but I find this, I'm a little curious here. So you wanted to do your MBA, and then, you also worked with an investment banking domain, and then you choose not to. So what happened in those times of your work that you chose not to kind of pursue that, if you don't mind sharing that?
No, I don't mind sharing it. I think it's a complicated topic, so I wouldn't say I understand it myself entirely. But I think what happened was there was a crisis for me at work because I didn't understand where I was, in a sense.
Right.
It could be because I was an immigrant. I mean, at that time I was 25 years old, but so 15 years in the United States, you could say. But still, I didn't understand some things.
Right.
Um, and those things, as you probably know from your own experiences, those those are very hard things to understand. There's very sort of soft, invisible cultural cues and ways of behaving that it's just impossible to really understand that unless you're
Got it, Omar. Yep,
raised in
sure.
it. So I think that was one thing. My philosophy, based on whatever random things that shaped me, was that searching for the truth was an important, valuable, like a value.
Right.
Searching for the truth. Um, so when I was assigned to investigate some oil companies, I went ahead and started that. And I was really lucky in the company I was with, was really very tolerant. I think remarkable. Even at the time, I felt it was remarkable for how academic they were and how much free time they would give you to study. Your field, but still study free without producing any output. So there was really like an academic department at that time. Anyway, I followed my instinct and also the situation that led me, and I went and studied and studied and studied, and it took a long time to produce my first piece of research. It took, I think, 6 months, and I became more confident in that field and started to notice things that I felt other people were not noticing. And then I reached, in retrospect, I can tell you this, I reached a paradigm conflict with my immediate supervisor. Because I'll give you a story. When I first started, was assigned this company to study this company. He came to me and sort of sat down and briefed me on what I'm supposed to be doing here, because I'd never
Right.
heard of a cash flow model or at that point I was a math geek. I wasn't even a geek. I was just a math student. And he sort of briefed me on what I'm supposed to do. He said, take one of these models, from the investment banks. They're always publishing full models of the company. Take one of them, change the numbers a little bit, and, and then use that, you know. And I stayed very silent, but in my mind there was like a firestorm. I was like, what are you talking about?
Right.
If I could talk to him, and I was like, are you nuts? Why would I ever do that? Why would I ever
Right.
do that? And so he understood the world very differently from me. And I'm not trying to pan him actually, although I sort of I don't really respect that model, but he understood the world he was in much, much better than I understood it.
Right.
Much, much better. And I didn't understand that he understood it better. I thought this guy is a fraud. So we had a big problem. I created a big problem for myself. So that was, I think, the genesis of the reason of the crisis and the reason I left that field, that whole arena,
Right.
because I ultimately felt very not confident. Like I didn't understand politics at all. I mean, I think I'm sort of a record holder for least understanding of politics at that age for any like the under 30-year-old record holder for least understanding of politics. So that's why I left.
Got it, Omar. And did you ultimately get around to correcting your math scores in the GMAT?
Yes, I did. That took 4 years or so, or maybe 3.5 years
Wow. Okay.
before I took my second time the GMAT. And I did improve the math score tremendously. I finished with a 99th percentile score, so it was a 50 on the test, on the math section of the test. So that was it a 50 or 51? I think it was a 50, but I forget. Anyway, it was 99th percentile score on that section. Or no, that's not actually true. Sorry, Jag. I think if I recall that score at the time, it actually wasn't 99th percentile on the math section. It was maybe
Right.
97th percentile because so many people were getting
Okay.
51. Probably people from your neighborhood were just always killing GMAT. So I got respectable score in the math, let's say, and a slightly better score in the verbal, and then I was very pleased with that. So I figured I was done. 780, I'm done.
Got it. Omar, for those people who probably may be facing the same problem, what exactly did you have to change in your math approach to change that from 65th percentile to the almost near 100 percentile?
Well, I'm not sure if this is going to be relevant today because the test is very different now
Right.
from when I took it in 2005, or it was actually not 2005, it was 2004 or so, the first time. It had basically just become computer adaptive,
Right.
right? And it was a very long test. And I think 75 minutes on either section was still the case. And
Right.
the second time I took it, it was also 75 minutes per section, but it was just a much harder exam, but it was still adaptive. But still, you had 75 minutes uh, on the math section specifically. So what I came up with over those first few years was a strategy to do really well on certain problems. So to solve certain problems much quicker than expected, so that I could buy the time to think sort of normally, like how you, yeah, nothing special about the problems that were really hard. So instead of thinking about the test as Kaplan taught, for example, that you have 2 minutes per question, I was basing it on no, you have actually some questions need to be solved in about 30 seconds, so that you can have about 4 minutes on some other questions. So that's kind of a hack in a sense, in a way to approach the test. And then that was really successful because I finished the math section with 15 minutes spare time. So I
Right.
was like, I can't believe that. But then the score came back. I was like, I must have done pretty well, I guess. So that was possible in those days. Now it's not really possible. I think I've noticed the test has changed a lot. First of all, it's much shorter, which means if you are following that kind of strategy, well, you don't see enough questions to build up enough cushion, right?
Right.
So you get that sort of invalidated this whole approach that I had. And second of all, they also went one level up, possibly in response to the GRE's revision in the last decade. They went one level up in the difficulty level of the questions. So now you're seeing things they're just pure math. There's no training other than pure math training, like math Olympiad type of training. So it is a much harder experience. I mean, if you're seeking to outperform, which was like my initial, not my initial, but my
Right.
enduring impulse, um, then outperformance is now much more difficult. So I
Got
think
it, Omar.
what I did was very good at that time, but nowadays I think the test is just a different test.
Got it.
How would you train today? I think it's a question for younger teachers. In my practice, like more ambitious, I would say, teachers who are still thinking about the test itself, whereas my own journey has evolved, changed to thinking about more about philosophical type of issues. Yeah, it's a bit lazy, I suppose, but that's how it's been. That's what's more interesting now.
Great. Okay. Interesting that you have to say that. So, how did you was teaching? You think from in the hindsight, you think teaching was the right profession that you chose for your style of living? Like you say, philosophical, a little laid back. You think teaching would kind of facilitate that kind of a lifestyle?
I think teaching is well, it depends what you're teaching, I think. But teaching the GMAT at the time that I was teaching the GMAT was very, very good for me. I think it was an excellent career development, not career development, personal development choice. It both gives you a reasonable budget so you can live on it, right? But it doesn't suck up 60 hours of your time unless you wanted to. So you do have time to follow your own independent explorations. And I didn't realize this at the time, but now it's much more clear to me. I really am very interested in investigations. I'll almost investigate anything. There's lots of things that really attract me to think about how they work and what they work and try this and try that. So if you're that kind of person, then teaching a standardized test, I think, is couldn't think of anything better than that. It's a perfect career.
Great.
May not be forever, but it's definitely a step, not a step, but a stage on your journey for
Right.
that kind of person.
Right. Has it changed for you? The way you said, at the time that you taught, it helped you, but has it changed in a different way today? Are you not able to be the same way that you did back in the day?
Yes, it has changed for me, and it's difficult to be the same as before because my scope was much more focused before, much more narrow. You know,
Right.
I was a better fit, I think, for the industry than I am now because, well, I think this happens when you're involved in teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Because teaching is what is it? It's sort of a very enigmatic profession. You know, you can do teaching, and it's like being a waiter. You can almost anybody can get a job as a waiter, but to survive as a waiter, in a service profession for 20 years, that requires like installing some philosophy, whether you mean to or not. But you have to be fit for that in some way, and then that changes you, I think. So teaching for me, I could have pursued, I think, a model that is. There are some famous colleagues of mine who are really good at broadcasting. You know, they're exceptional speakers and performers. You could say they're in it because it's like theater. You know,
Right.
and I'm not saying that they are bad teachers. On the contrary, right? They're delivering good techniques, solid technique. They're making it interesting. So yeah, there's no complaints. It's just a question of a different style. You know, I think those that paradigm with people with that paradigm, they can continue indefinitely because they're always going to get something besides the success. They're going to get personal reward from doing what they love to do, which is performing. Part of what they love to do is perform. So whereas myself, I am still much more shy, and my interest in this dynamic of teaching, my personal interest I'm talking about is more about investigating and healing and adjusting and studying, investigating personality on my own and inevitably the people that I'm meeting with and how that works together. So that's become much more dominant for me, and now it's. My views on teaching is totally different than it was back then. Back then, I was like, I've got these fantastic techniques. Now, how quickly can I get you to get these techniques? How high can you get your score, and how fast can we do it?
Right.
this kind of a Ferrari mentality. Uh, and now I'm like, well, there's a journey here. Who is this person? Let's see what is of most use to them right now. How fast? How slow? It's all these sort of psychological dimensions that became much more interesting, heavy for me. So then I can't teach the same way anymore. Like
Right. Right.
it's much more of a puzzle now than it was before.
Great. Can you, this is interesting because you're saying your teaching style has totally changed with time,
Yeah.
right? It's not the same anymore. Like, as you said, back then it was techniques, it was like more black and white. But how do you approach teaching today? Do you do one on one or do you do group classes? And, how is that, in combination with your style of teaching? Can you just talk about all that?
Yeah, I'm still up for doing a group class, but most of the clientele in Netherlands is one-on-one.
Right.
The market here pre-COVID, the market here was 2,000 test takers a year. And some of them are taking it twice and so on. So it's actually a relatively big market for it was a relatively big market for not counting India, United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
For everybody else, and not counting China, it was a very big market because they require the GMAT here for certain degrees, not the MBA. So there's sort of a demographic here that is taking the GMAT anyway, and there's a small demographic of people taking the GMAT to get an MBA at a US style or let's say international university. So that number of people who are actually going to be my clients is quite small in the Netherlands.
Right.
So it has basically evolved away from group work to individual one-on-one work, one-on-one tutoring for both segments. But and there's this other issue which is to do with my history. Like I'm not a good marketer or salesman, and I'm competing with people who are fantastic. I think at that. You've seen this dichotomy between the people who can sell and market a product and the people who can develop and research a product. So it's tough doing a group class when you're coming from the wrong side of that equation.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you, do you have to get the students yourself, or, do you work for an organization that takes care of sourcing students for you, Omar?
No, I get them myself. I used to work for other companies,
Right.
but 2015 I became independent,
Right.
and since then I've been getting the students myself. And that's a tough transition, I think. And yeah, I think if you're that's an important point, I think, in the journey of a new teacher, whether and how
Right.
and when to do that.
So how do you look back at the transition? Do you think you could have done things differently, or do you stand by the transition? But I'm sure you had your reasons for the same.
I would have done things a little bit differently. I think in this uh, in this business, you need a partner who can complement.
Right.
Unless you don't, but I think I definitely could have used one. You need someone who's a good fit for you because running a business, I think, isn't it's just not a one man job. Being a professional is a one man job. You can be a
Right.
professional lawyer and so on, but if you're running a business, you need at least two and possibly more. A team of people who can cover all the departments,
Right.
right? Even if they don't exist formally, but still, that way of thinking is kind of a department, and you need somebody to man that station. And I didn't respect this idea enough. I would have done that differently and found well, it's not so easy to find a partner, but I would have looked more seriously into who can uh, jive, who can fit with my values and still cover the other departments. You know, so I had to
Right.
learn all this myself because I'm sort of stubborn and isolationist in this way. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't recommend that to someone who's trying to succeed. It's a harder, much longer journey. to sort of grow beyond your own ability. And it's one of
Right.
those things like the cultural fit in the United States. It's really not that possible to do this.
Hmm.
It might take 20 years. So I think it's,
Right.
it's better to have a partner. If you're on the marketing or sales side, you need to find a teacher that you respect and it can partner with you, and then you start a company 50-50, and you each do what you do best.
Right. But you started this in 2015, but here we are in 2023. So you're here. So what are the things that you got right, at least?
The things I got right. Well, I think I sailed on my uh, teaching ability. I sailed, got through on my teaching ability, like
Right.
the dedication to research, I think is the thing that kept me competitive, right? At first it was math, and then after that was I had sort of reached a respectable level. Then it was perfection of verbal techniques, a greater
Mm-hmm.
insight into the structure of those questions.
Right.
And after that was advanced, it was a greater insight into the personal rapport with the students, and how to deliver, how to speak about those topics. I'm not a good speaker, I think, about new topics, but those topics I was a very good speaker on. So that
Right.
was what carried me through all those years, is the research focus.
Right. But in terms of getting students, was it, how did you get your first student after you transitioned from working for an organization to starting up, being an independent tutor? What was the story of getting your first student?
Oh, the story of my first student, actually, that was hard to say who was my first student for GMAT that I got purely from not knowing anybody else. Can't remember who that was, actually. But I put up a website at some point and started advertising with Google and with Facebook.
Oh, right. Okay.
And some inquiries, I think, came that way. I'm not sure if those were the first ones or not, but it was basically putting up a rudimentary uh, public face, you know. And I think one next step was getting an office. That was another, a little bit later, a good step, because yeah, I think getting an office is a big deal. People are yeah, I think we're funny that way, human beings. If you're not wearing an office, then people just instantly don't take it seriously. You know,
Right.
this was like before Zoom, right? If you remember,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was before everybody was in their underwear. uh, and you had Tucker Carlson in his fake living room, and all before everybody was making this stuff up in their basement. Uh,
Right.
there was like this huge impetus, to have
Office.
yeah, gold letters on the door and whatnot. So that was something that made a big difference at that time, and I think it still probably would. So having an office, I mean, but I don't have an office now. I just teach privately.
Online.
I have a small office at home, but it's not a corporate office.
Right. But are your classes in person
Yeah,
or is it online?
I prefer in person. I think I don't like the online format for GMAT.
Okay.
It's a difficult, in GMAT you need to see what the person is doing as
Right.
as they are doing it. You need to sit with them and sense where is their question mark.
Right.
You know, and you don't get a lot of that information from the current technology. You know,
Right.
you just don't have this source of. I don't know what it is. It's maybe seeing the minor behaviors. How you handle the pen, what kind of letters you're making. There's all these sort of subtle signals that are coming through in a personal conversation. I mean, face to face, then that are not really coming through on a call. So I find that product not satisfactory. You know, like
Right.
you can have a conversation. I don't think you can teach very well. I cannot teach very well mathematics. Um, it probably could be resolved by a good investment in the technology, several screens and so on. Things have come a long way, I think, but they're still not where the personal encounter is. You see a lot of
Got it,
people
Omar.
these days during the pandemic that really leveled up, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
you see people doing much better work online. But
right,
if you notice, it's still one dimensional. Like the best work is one dimensional. So I can
right,
present to you something, an online class, but the minute it comes to interacting with you, like really sensing what you're doing and fielding your questions, that is still sort of at level zero on the internet, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. You speak to more professionals, I think, than I have. What do you think?
um it's, it boils down to people. And say for example, you're pretty clear about the style that you want to do GMAT in, right? So it's more about, and I've always believed, and people have always told that there is a market for all styles of delivery or all styles of teaching. And that's where I was going to get to the next point. On behalf of all those listeners, who might not who are not a big fan of online teaching, who would like to meet people in person and then teach them face to face. I'd like to ask you, what is your current way of getting students to know that, a tutor like you is there? So how do you uh, source your students in today's day and age?
Today's day and age, I think LinkedIn is for me the working the best. So
Right,
these are inquiries via LinkedIn for the most part. Some people directly from the
right,
website, but I no longer advertise on Google, so it's basic from LinkedIn. Um,
right,
and so that's a lot slower. I think it's marketing, but it's a lot slower. Yeah.
right. So when students reach out to you, do you kind of think whether the student is the right fit for you or not, just like the way
Well,
students would do with teachers?
I don't think about that, no. I'm very
Right,
interested in students in general, so I regard every student as if they found me, they needed to find me, and if they decide that they need to move on, that's also something that has to happen. Sort of
right.
karma based, you know. I think everybody has some interesting material for me as a teacher.
Mm,
I'm interested in what students are going through, so there's hardly a student that is not interesting to me. You know,
right. And you said, the students are finding you on LinkedIn and coming to you, then there is a thing to it. So what do you think is that, if you've interacted with students and in your experience, what do you think is that makes students come and reach out to you? Is it even the students are not interested in online, or is it something else that kind of, makes you appealing to your students?
I think that was you mentioned one part of it. There are some people who are just prefer they prefer a face-to-face
Right,
teacher. So that's definitely one part of it that I can say for sure that I've heard from them. Um, and the other thing I think is more spiritual. I think people vibe with who they vibe with. You know,
right,
they they
right,
they they have some way of knowing who to who to choose as a teacher or as a any kind of colleague, right? Some people
right,
know that, I
right,
think. Not many people, maybe, but quite some number of people know. Yes, with this style or something that they're doing that resonates with me. I think I can continue with that person. So they make decisions like that based on whatever they see or sense.
got it, Omar.
From
And
my point of view, it's because of the teaching. Because I'm really dedicated to the um, yeah performance optimization. You could call it. I really am keen
yeah,
on that. So that's what from my perspective, what has made the difference. But obviously, there's more to it. But from my perspective, my contribution, if you might say, is I'm focusing on the performance. So maybe
right.
that sort of seeps out in some way to the students. I'm sure it does. I mean, that's my intention anyway.
Great. I was going to ask you this, right? Because you said when you started off, you were about techniques and all that, tricks and tips and stuff like that. But, you've undergone your own journey and you've had your own evolution. And it's not the same way of teaching that you did in the last decade or so. It's changed right now. And, you know, when it comes to standardized tests, right, there is also a lot of pressure on the students. There's the time element. There is, you know, so many things. There's, you know, anxiety among students and all that. So in your teaching currently, you know, how do you bring in your spiritual side of things? Do you use that to kind of, you know, help students navigate this entire test prep journey?
Yes, I think that the answer to that is that I do. That's a multidimensional topic. Like I think a lot of times people don't think about the philosophy of this enough, so they're trapped in the pressure.
Right, right,
Well, I used to be made very nervous by this because it's tremendous pressure. You sort of feel it. Uh,
right,
um, I think the answer to that is that's a personal journey for someone. You know, you have to put it into a perspective. You have to use your experience to put the situation into perspective. Like sometimes they feel that they must get into business school this by the fall. You know, by January or by September, I have to be there, or my entire life will crumble. And
right.
well, I don't think that's true. I think it's something about I didn't go that route. Maybe because I'm still here, breathing and living, and 20, 25 years later, maybe I didn't go that route anyway, and maybe that's gives them some comfort. But they have to find a way to approach and deal with this issue. That they are where they are. You know, uh, if you have a 600, you're not going to get 780 in 6 weeks. I mean, that's
Right,
probably not going to happen. So
right,
you have to come to terms with that. But I don't.
right,
I just try to put things in perspective and give them more definite ideas about what can be done. You know,
right,
if you have 6 weeks, you really must finish in 6 weeks. Well, this is the 2 or 3 different things that you could do. They would result in so many points, expected improvement. You know, this is a sort of commitment you have to make. But I try to basically see if you can connect to the study impulse more than the achievement pressure, right? If you can connect to the study impulse, the joy of learning, right? You're learning about yourself. I think the GMAT is fantastic, or the GRE also, the SAT. They're all actually fantastic tests
right,
or instruments for learning about yourself. You know, because you are a performance organization, you know, just inside your head. And how do you deal with everything that you see? How do you process information? How can you make it faster? Where do you get stuck on something,
right,
technical or spiritual? You know, this is all very interesting, I think, to everybody. I mean, it should be. I think it instinctually is. So if you can connect
yep,
to that sort of to those elements and just drift closer to that and drift away from achievement goals, although they can exist, but they don't motivate you in your day to day. In your day to day, you connect to something that's much more profound, like sustainable, in a sense that it rewards you from minute by minute, you know, and it's not dependent on really any achievement goal from the set by the outside. You're just learning how to think more clearly under pressure.
right,
You're learning to understand English much more deeply, you know, so that you can detect, for example, a fraudulent statement just by looking at it. You know, oh, that could be they didn't nail that. Oh, they made a strange transition here between this debate and that debate, and they sort of made a link that is not substantiated, right? The classic GMAT situation, a critical reasoning situation, and you find that that's a very useful thing to do in regular life. So these sort of personal rewards, I think, are the much better way to study for the GMAT, even if it means that you won't be ready this year. So what? So what if you're not ready this year?
right.
Like,
Yeah,
so what? So you'll be 26 when you go to business school, or you'll be 28. I mean, does it really make a bit of difference? And I'm not even discussing how much money business school costs. Just does it make a bit of difference if you're 2 years older? I don't think it does. It only improves the way you're going to function and what you're going to get out of the school experience, right? So that's
Right.
the general
Absolutely.
approach.
Great, Omar. And when first talk to students the first time, and before they actually enroll into your program, so do you kind of converse with them in terms of even apart from their GMAT and the goal, just like you said, right? I mean, do you just get a rough idea, a sense of where they are, and do you kind of change your messaging or your conversations with them based on how they come across to you? You read them better, rather. That's my point.
I definitely want to read people. Yeah, I think I think that's happening anyway, right, all the time. But I think it's very useful to know who it is you're standing next to, or who you're talking to. What are they? Uh, my part is my intention is to move them further, with the GMAT. But the GMAT is a very big test, and so is the GRE, right? Like, move forward with what? With the grammar? Maybe you should not waste time with the math, you know, right now.
Right.
Maybe you should not waste time with this or that. Maybe you should think about. So I am trying to read, who is this person? What is the easiest way to move forward? You know, like
Right.
because you want them to start moving forward. So I don't come anymore with a fixed agenda. Well, this is how this works. Spend 6 weeks doing math fundamentals, and then after that we spend. I don't do that anymore at all. I mean, I have modules like that. Let's say sort of soft modules like that, so that if I
Right.
determine in the conversation or in the diagnostic test, I give one of those. If I determine that there's an issue with this algebraic structure, or the person is having issues with uh, number properties or whatever it is, or it's English as a second language, or it's a different kind of grammar than American grammar, right? Because it's an American exam. So based on that, I will sort of work towards delivering the module that I have in that space, right? But even that
Right.
module is customed because it has many parts, right? So what rule of grammar do you want to talk about first, right? Well, that really depends on our connection, right? I have to feel what would be the most simple. In Dutch, they have a nice word, makkelijk, sort of handy. You know, do you want to hear about the uh, the 5 uses of VING, a verb with an ing ending? Is that maybe that's the most fun thing to talk about? So we do that. Otherwise, if it doesn't seems like you already know all about it, we'll talk about it later. I'll make sure later on that you do know those 5 ways, even though you didn't want to talk about it, or didn't look like it was going to happen in the first time I brought it up. So I definitely read and I adjust based on that.
Great stuff. And Omar, has there been an instance, where students take up GMAT, as you said in the beginning, for a lot of reasons. Sometimes there's external pressure, there's family reasons and stuff like that. Goals that they've set for themselves. Has there been a situation, where a student has joined you and then midway realized, GMAT is not really what they want to do because of the conversation with you, and they chose something what they really wanted to do? Has that happened?
Don't think it's really happened with me. I think most of the people are very dedicated to the GMAT or to their career plan.
Right. Right.
So um, I'm struggling to think of somebody that I might have known or remember who changed path, but it was one person, and I don't remember exactly what happened. I'm not sure that they did change path, because
Right.
basically, essentially, almost everybody in the mathematical sense has taken the test. Uh,
Right. Right. Got it.
I don't think I would discourage people from taking. No, now I think I would discourage people more than I used to. I think the GMAT exam is now not what it was, and it's
Hmm.
that's not a good thing for the students. Although theoretically they evolved to make it better test for students, right? Shorter, so it's not so tiring, and these sort of steps to online testing at home. You can take the test at home. That's I found that I don't know what you think about that, Jack. I find that very interesting. You know, they've taken all these steps that I think are actually detrimental or impair the value of the exam. So I would rather nowadays take the GRE if I was myself thinking about it, and it's more accepted, right, at business school. So it is as accepted now at business school as the GMAT. So I would, and I think it's a better test. You know, the GMAT was bought by a private company, right? By a
Right.
division of Reuters, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the GRE is still private, or not private, but not for profit.
Not for profit. Right.
And
Right.
maybe that's the difference.
Right. So, do you also teach for GRE?
Yes, I do teach the GRE, but
Right.
I think I'm in transition, so I'm not a specialist on the GRE. You know,
Right. Right.
I'm competitive, but not for the highest levels of the GRE, or maybe some parts of the critical reasoning and reading comprehension, these sort of analysis of texts. That's solid enough, but I think their math is different than the GMAT math, and I wouldn't say I'm competitive for GRE math yet.
Right.
I'm decent.
Right.
I mean, when I say not competitive, I mean people trying to get a top score, 99th percentile score, where I we used to teach the GMAT. I cannot do that for the GRE. Also, I haven't taken the GRE in 100 years, I think. So I haven't taken the new GRE. So I certainly wouldn't try to teach it before I did that. Before I got a top score on it. So that math would be a project that I think that I would have to undertake. Probably would take 6 months or so, maybe a year to train up, because they're all very specific. You have to read the test and try to come up with some response to the challenge, and that's R&D that takes some months at least.
Right.
So I do teach it, but not at the level. My product, let's say, my public persona is built around sort of elite level tutoring for the GMAT, and some of those things do translate to the GRE, but I can't represent myself as being an elite GRE tutor. And I'm
Got
not,
it,
I'm not
Omar.
sure if I ever will go that far, because I'm much more interested now in health and posture. For example, one of the like I'd say I'm more interested in executive coaching now than I am in the GMAT or the GRE as tests. I'm much more interested in performance optimization as a holistic subject.
Right.
You know, and those things are not really addressed in the space. Like, for example, very few people now, I think, that'll probably change soon because pace of development, but very few people are talking about the impact of nutrition, the true impact of nutrition on test
Right.
performance or public performance of any kind. Like, what is the impact of nutrition on your chances of becoming a CEO? You know, or getting
Right.
getting being able to compete at whatever job you're doing. Well, I think the impact is huge.
Right.
The impact of proper understanding of vitamins and minerals and other matters of health. That impact is tremendous, and it far overwhelms the impact of your GRE or GMAT score. But in fact, it influences your GMAT and your how much you can study for those tests, among other things, is is uh, is really heavily weighted by the nutritional understanding or the nutritional paradigm that you're using. If you're still eating the, for example, the sunflower oils, right? The seed oils of the various kind
Right.
of seed oils, uh, and you're still eating that, you know. Well, maybe if you're 25, it's okay, but the impact of those things builds up over time, apparently, so that by the time you're 40, you simply cannot function the same way as you did when you're 25. And then people say, well, you're aging. Well, but I don't think you're aging. I think it's pretty clear that you've been eating rubbish, and that's why you can't perform the same kind of intensity. You can't think for as long. You can't run as long or as fast. It's because of the nutrition.
Right.
And of course, that's not an issue that affects a 25-year-old pretty much. You can't feel it at 25, but you can feel other things much more immediately, like vitamins and the mineral profile. You can feel that, I think, from day to day. So that and other aspects of holistic performance are like where I'm more gravitating to now.
Great stuff. Do you bring in this performance optimization angle into your test prep coaching as
Yes,
well?
I do. I do.
Could you please elaborate and talk a little bit about that? What are the key pillars of this performance optimization, Omer?
Well, I think there are three. There are at least three. There also it's a new relationship, so you don't just unload on someone. Here's the whole, as they say in Hebrew, Megillah. It's like you want all the Vedas like in 5 minutes. No. So what you do, I think, is start with some ideas in the nutritional space and some ideas in the um, circulation space. So
Right.
circulation is the more difficult one to improve. I mean, it takes longer. But nutritions, vitamin, minerals, those can have a day-to-day or even after a week for sure. You have an impact, you have an improvement. So I start by discussing the kinds of vitamins to take, right, and how much of those vitamins to take. And it's a bit of a sensitive subject because people are used to talking about health only with their doctor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We've
And
all
there is a lot of discussion going on about nutrition out there, right?
There
I
are,
mean, there
right?
are some people who are vegans, and there are some people who are carnivores, and then there are some people who advocate balanced approach and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really quite a thing out there.
Yeah, that
It's
space is blowing up, right? I mean,
yeah,
the
it is.
there's so many controversies in that space and interesting viewpoints. So I became, especially since COVID, I became very interested in that whole. I've watched, I don't know, it could be 1,000 hours at this point of podcasts in nutrition.
Right, right,
Fascinating
right.
space. And I've experimented with it and studied it like on my own self and stuff like that. So I think some of the issues are really controversial and impossible to decide. So you have to just experiment and see if it makes a difference for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think for
And
example, you raised the carnivore vegan issue. That's, I think, probably a personal choice, but not necessarily, right? It might be that someone has because that brings up the intestinal bacteria that a person is having, right? That whatever bacteria that was, and that depends on whether they were breastfed, for example. They would have a different intestinal bacteria colony,
right,
possibly
right,
requiring a
right,
different diet. And maybe
right,
you can change the diet and the bacteria colony will adjust and change with you, but maybe it won't, or maybe it takes
right,
time. It's a really controversial subject, I think, to make a blanket statement. And probably the best approach is individual experimentation
right.
and an individual journey to see can I transition from carnivore to mostly fruit? How is it possible? How could I possibly even think about that? Maybe it's not possible. I'm not sure. But maybe there's two or three things you can do to have a decent chance of making that successful, right?
Right.
So these are really interesting, I think, personal journeys that I guess lots of people are having now. So it's fantastic
Yeah.
to live in these times with the YouTube and everything. Everyone's sharing about it. It's fantastic.
There are times when you think, oh, I don't have much information, but then information overload is also a thing. So that's precisely why sometimes they just conveniently say ignorance is bliss. But sometimes when you're presented with so much of information, everything that has its own backing, you will have to then, take it upon you to take a call and, make a decision about it.
Yes, I think you perfectly put it that there's simultaneously an information overload and an information paradise, and how do you handle it? I think every community, like uh, a family, for example, or uh, even a person, you have to have time or you have to have someone dedicated to doing that research, right? So For example, I brought up the polyunsaturated oils from the seed oils. I didn't do that
Right.
research myself. What I did was I relied on my background as a GMAT teacher. So it's a fantastic training for critical reasoning to
Right.
evaluate other people's arguments. So then you
Right.
can
Right.
find, because of times, you don't have to spend 20 years on the GMAT to get this. I think if you knew in advance, you could spend a few weeks or a few months and get this part up and running to the point where you can evaluate the various viewpoints and detect which ones have holes, right? So I relied on other people doing this research for me, and
Right.
just
Right.
evaluating who is the one that makes the most sense.
Right. And personally
Jag,
for
your
you,
screen froze, so not sure if you're still there.
oh,
Maybe we
I
need to
am.
pick
I
up
am here.
and reboot.
I'm here. I'm here, Omar.
You did? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Just text.
If it happens, just give it a few seconds. It's gonna come back. This
Sure.
happened right at the beginning as well. So yeah, yeah. I saw your message.
Yeah,
And
I think
personally for
what
you,
you need is every community has to have somebody who's doing who just that is
yeah,
their job. They're doing the research, and it can't be
yeah.
the American Heart Association that's doing it for you. It has to be
Nope.
your family's heart specialist, or investigator, your family's uh, private investigator, or
No.
your
I
company's
think
private investigator that is doing that research for you.
I would just put it like this: that research has to be done by the people who's got the best interest of you. That's about it.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Uh,
People that you know are trustworthy.
yeah, the even I mean, as much as doctors can be your families, sometimes unconsciously they're so intertwined with other things outside of the family. Sometimes doctors are also lost. They are genuine, but they genuinely believe something else, that actually may not be the case, because it's a combination of their pride and the amount of time that they've put into in learning so much, the hard work that they've put into to become the doctor that they are. It's not easy for all the doctors to kind of despite having spent hours and years of their life on it. But when they come to know that there might be something wrong, I don't know how many of them are willing to kind of, throw it away, or maybe even be open enough to tell themselves, oh, I might have done wrong things for the last 20 years. I don't think there are a lot of people out there that are ready to do that. So that's where I was coming from when I said, you have to be unrelated to the industry to kind of, have a very unbiased research and opinion. That's what I meant.
Well, I don't know if you have to be unrelated, but you have to at least go through some. Because, for example, you have a famous, who's I don't have his name, but and he's quite old, but he's Indian doctor, and I think he was head of some medical faculty, and he's very, very.
You're talking about Dr. B.M. Hegde?
Yes, yes, I think that's him.
He talks about
Yeah,
heart. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He talks
he.
a lot about heart.
So he's a person with
Heart.
tremendous integrity. I think I would totally trust my heart with him.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And indeed, that's rare for a doctor. Maybe you have to go through. Maybe you have to become 70 before that happens to you. Maybe he was like that his whole life. I don't know, but it is rare. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's worked for you in terms of nutrition?
I think what's worked for me is well, that's that's a hard one to answer in one sentence. I follow Ray Peat on the issue of the polyunsaturated versus saturated oils. So I don't eat sunflower seed oils, which are everywhere. Palm oil, they're all
Yeah.
polyunsaturated. Means
Yeah.
if I understand him correctly, it means that they rust, they oxidize,
Yeah.
so they turn into rubbish.
Right. Right.
So I don't eat any of those, and that's been for about a year. I think it's. I have not felt the difference in my body, but I do feel it when I ever happen to have any of those oils. Then
Right.
I feel absolutely revolted by it. It coats the whole mouth with an oily feeling, which coconut oil doesn't do. I can eat coconut oil and it's like I just had water. So satisfying and so clean. I don't have that
Right.
feeling at all. You know this, yeah?
Yeah.
I think that's the only sign that I've gotten. But I have perfect confidence in the analysis that was presented by Ray Peat, who's a physiologist. Um, and he studied the subject of how the polyunsaturated oils came to be called essential fatty acids. Omega
Right.
3, omega 6, omega 9. That
Right.
whole evolution from eating butter and lard to eating sunflower oil, etc., and fish oil. He studied that from every dimension. So from the sociological perspective, from the business perspective, from the physiological or nutritional perspective. That's what he is. He's a nutritionist, physiologist. And his case is really compelling. I think that this was clearly a case of industry trying to dispose of its toxic byproducts
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
feeding it to us. And they've constructed an amazing narrative, which is very credible. I mean, it's actually really credible. You look at it, if you didn't know any better, you would believe it because of the number of people, the organizations, the studies. I'll give you another example. There's on YouTube you can find a video about some fellow who did a. It's not about Ray Peat's work. It's about vitamin B12. Fellow did a study on vitamin B12. It says it's whether he wanted to investigate. He represents himself as wanting to investigate whether a high dose B12 is good for you or bad for you. So he did the study, and the study is published. I had a look at the study, uh, but his representation on YouTube, his interview, and the thing that you would see and respond to, was that actually they found it was bad for you. It was slightly worse to have a high dose of B12 than a low dose B12. And you're like, okay, interesting. Maybe I won't take B12 then. You come away with this very easy conclusion. If it was slightly bad for you, he's a doctor. He's sitting in a laboratory wearing a white robe.
Right.
He must know.
Right. Right. Right.
Uh, then you look at the study. It turns out he was studying when he says to you B12. This is classic GMAT. He says to you B12 is sort of not good for you in high doses. When you look at the study, it's not B12. It's cyanocobalamin. It's a specific version of B12.
Right.
It's the version that's made from cyanide. So it's the cyano in cyanocobalamin is from cyanide. So there's 4 or so different kinds of B12, and he chose to study a high dose of the one that contains a poison, and he found that it was slightly bad for you. So,
That was nice. That's nice.
so that's the kind of thing that's
Great.
going on in nutrition. And Ray Peat studied the whole that identified this whole fraudulent mechanism in the
Right.
polyunsaturated space, and I think his case is really convincing. So that's what you need, I think. You need to find those people who have studied something.
Yeah.
One of the topics of that, whether it's the B vitamins or it's
Yeah.
the vitamin D. That's another one that's I think a little harder to know what's good and what's bad. But vitamin D is another controversial topic. I think it's controversial because everybody's in favor of it now, right?
Oh.
All the organizations that are telling you should eat omega-3 fatty acids. It's essential. All those organizations are in favor of vitamin D now, which
Vitamin
is
D.
the number one reason why I'm not sure if I should take it. Which I think for the moment, if the sun is out, I'd rather do that.
Exactly. That's what I was about to say. Vitamin D. What is it? I mean, there's sun outside, right?
Yeah, go outside. Why are you stuck inside? When the sun is out, you should be out there with it. And when
Yeah.
it's not out, then you can go back and do whatever it is you were doing indoors. It's very simple.
Yeah. Great stuff, Omar. It was, you know what? Actually, we started off on one topic, and then we were talking about another topic. But then I love the way you kind of brought in the GMAT twist to the B12 thing. But it was very unique conversation that I've had with you. You've brought in a different dimension to teaching, and probably this could serve as a starting point. I wish I could probably go back and think of certain specific topics that I think can elicit a lot from you. That'll be really valuable. So I'd love to do that if you enjoyed. And let's see. I'll reach out to you. We'll keep in touch. But it was great talking to you.
Thank you, Jack, for your kind words. It was very, very pleasurable, an honor for me to speak with you about some of my
It's
favorite
my
things.
pleasure.